we're all setting up microphones and so on. Well, thank you for all three papers, and for kind of agreeing to the challenge of being placed in this situation and talking about something that is not specifically your topic of research, but it's very courageous of you all to have agreed to look at Mira through your individual research interests. I think I'll kind of start. I'll go backwards in a way, because I think Aline's presentation gives us some good examples of the dangers of and the difficulties of presenting Brazilian art to in an international context to audiences that might have expectations, and curators who might have particular art historical interests and might, in a way, manipulate visual and art historical information to their own interests. And I'm particularly thinking of the kind of, yesterday I think Brian, he was talking about categories and conventions of within art history, and I think that there is a kind of a convention that has become more and more common when dealing with Brazilian art in an international context, which I think if Oswald de Andrade was alive today, he would call macumba para turista, which is a kind of, well, Aline mentioned the joy of life, explosion of colours, noise, taste, and all of these are kind of somewhat cliche expectations of what Brazilian culture should be. And you rightly mentioned that Mira Schendel kind of stands very uncomfortably within such a context, and that kind of exemplifies the difficulty we have in as art historians, which is the case of Kiki and Sophia, of approaching Mira's work, as there is also on this one side the kind of cliche of having to somehow kind of relate to this kind of expectation of this cultural expectation that people have of Brazil. But on the other extreme, we have what Yves Alain Bois has called isomorphism, which is a kind of the temptation to connect works of art that look alike. So I think the exhibition Tangled Alphabets would kind of fall into that category as kind of artists that may have lived during the same period in a kind of close geographical, well, close, Latin America is a big continent, but relatively close geographical context, and well, actually, Leon Ferrari lived in São Paulo, so, but trying to bring these through because the works look alike, and there is a problematic here. But that doesn't mean to say that we should avoid trying to think of relations between art history and contemporary art. And I liked very much Kiki's approach to thinking of relations in terms of interest, but trying to not connect these in terms of influence or legacies and so on, but coincidences of interest. And with Sophia looking at kind of how common friendships, for example, how Augusto de Campos and Haroldo de Campos had conversations with different artists, such as Valdemar Cordeiro and Mira Schendel, and how these conversations might have led to very different works, but the works possess some kind of commonality through these kind of these types of kind of intellectual conversations. I'm going to open up to questions directly. So yeah, we have a. But could I remind you all to wait for the microphone because we are recording. So Nick, Isabel has a question over here in the front. Questions or comments? I mean.
So it's a common question. I just wanted to say, Kiki, I really enjoyed your approach, and it really made a lot of sense as a way of thinking through what the... I don't think it's only a question of shared interest, but also perhaps a sense of... My question, if this is a question, is, does it indicate something that artists in Brazil and elsewhere are returning to these questions? Does it, as a way of trying to join what we were talking about yesterday, but this turn towards not being kind of grounded by history and by the sort of absolute material present, but thinking about kind of spiritual questions or meditative questions? Does it say something about a political moment now that might help to answer Schendel's attitude towards politics then? That's what I was thinking in my mind. I don't know, it's not necessarily a question for you to answer, maybe it's just something to discuss more broadly.
I'm not sure if... I think what I found interesting about this particular side of Mira Schendel is exactly in relation to what I've been witnessing. Like I've been here in London since 2000, and especially in the past 10 years, Brazilian art has gained like this like unprecedented prominence. But it seems to me that most of the discussions around it, as was the case as well in the exhibitions that you showed, they mostly revolved around this one like neo-concrete matrix. And I think, well, this has been going on for a while, and it was like a long overdue reassessment of neo-concretism anyway. But I think in the international context, it became very kind of monolithic in a way. And I think what Mira's work can maybe, you know, give us is like other ways of investigating our modernity, and especially in a place like Brazil, which, you know, like it's a place where everybody believes in something, you know, like people are very spiritual or mystical, and this is completely widespread. It's quite different from here, I think, like in terms of society. And I think this aspect has been a bit, you know, repressed, and I just found it very interesting to see this emerging in these various discourses and practices, and I don't know what it means. I mean, this is like, you know...
know at the time, yeah. But somehow that makes the sort of uncertainty relates to how she might have regarded her own context, I guess.
I don't know.
But also I think as an alternative to people being kind of obsessed with participation in relationship to Brazilian art, and everything is about that kind of thing, she prevents that kind of reading.
You know, this.
We have a question at the back over there.
It's a comment really, and to Aline. Just I've been going to art exhibitions for 50 years, and in the last 10 years or 5 years in England, there's this spate of, well, I can only describe it as middle-class women bringing their screaming children into the galleries, which is totally disruptive. And the meditative nature of this show, it would destroy any possibility of my connecting with the art. And the attendants have no jurisdictional power to advise the people to either ask their children to leave until they've got over their tantrum, or, and it's just so disruptive. It's a purely practical question, but very, you know, I can anticipate, unless it's discussed in advance of this show, of kind of missing the mark. Thank you.
You mean like limited public access to the like?
No, not
I'm
limited
not sure,
public.
in a
but
museum.
if in the past, if a child started crying in a show, the mother would be so embarrassed that they'd take the children out.
Yeah.
But now they're proud and they'll swear at you if you even look at them the wrong way.
As an emergent curator, I emphasize this. You should bring children as much as possible, so they would be able to experience this since the beginning and grow in them the necessity or the, you know, anxiety for arts. I know it can be bothering sometimes, but I mean, in such large institutions like the ones I presented in the case studies, and Tate, I don't think this would be even like correct, like politically correct.
I think what he means is that there is a double side to this,
Yes.
the widening public for contemporary art, which is generally seen as positive, and particularly the museums such as Tate and the big institutions tend to evaluate the success of a show or an event by the sheer numbers of visitors. But I think the comment relates to the fact that this isn't necessarily only positive. There is also a problem with this kind of tendency towards mass, the massification of what would be considered in certain circles as a kind of high culture, which sometimes these kind of cultural artifacts demand contemplation. They demand a certain environment which this tendency tends to kind of deny, and there is this problem with. I imagine it is a problem that museums have to deal quite often with how to kind of negotiate and articulate public success with the actual kind of display conditions, let's put it that way, of a work of art. So I think that was
exactly right. Thank you.
There's Gerald over here.
Thank you. I have a question to Sophia. Yeah, I don't know if you how can you relate in a way these ink drawings like the one that Mira did with describes aguarrás and the it's more like a description of the object than let's see, if you think about American pop art, it's more like the identification of the brand immediately, and as almost like an affirmation of the consumerism of that society. And I think in Mira's work, except maybe the one with the collage with the liquors, and it's more like the language comes first. I think it's more like a description of what the object is, as let's see, as a valorization of the tag or the label of the object. Okay.
I absolutely agree in that sense. I mean, those drawings do not celebrate consumer culture in any way. It's just sort of, it's interesting to see how this sort of concept seeps in through her works slowly. There is a symptom of an awareness of that sort of imagery that she later on re-elaborates through the collages. And so because, of course, my point was that you can't say that she's a pop artist. However, there is a sort of undergoing discourse that she's constantly aware of, and it's slowly sort of through her reasoning and through her thought about language and how language informs the images she's drawing. Even that sort of idea starts to bloom underneath. It's very, very tenuous, but it's there. I feel that there is an awareness.
In a way, I feel like I'm rather perverse as a supervisor, having placed Sophia in this situation, which she kind of very courageously accepted. But she's just starting a PhD, looking at the problematics of how pop has been received, interpreted, transformed in Latin America during the 1960s and 70s. And so in a sense, what she's looking at is not necessarily how an artist's work might relate to pop, but how pop art is absorbed and transformed and made into something detached from what we usually associate with pop art. So trying to understand pop not in relation to what happened in the United States or in the UK, but trying to problematize it within the context of Latin America.
I've always thought that pop art would be a very interesting thing to look at in a global perspective, as apparently this exhibition is going to do, because pop art seems to have, very strongly both very local references and universal references, if you like. So that approach would, for example, put Andy Warhol into his local context. He's a very local artist, New York, and so on, and would bring out, sort of, in the case of Brazil, I think, obviously more than, I mean, the special relationship that you were dealing with, but most people, I think, would think of pop art in relation to Brazil with Antonio Dias, and the early work of Ana Maria Maulino, which are sort of very, very easily put in the category of pop.
Or Rubens Gershman.
And Rubens Gershman. And then it could be a very interesting exhibition, because these differences of the context in which the work came. Paolo Venancio wrote an interesting piece about the difference between the Brazilian city and the American city in relation to depiction of consumer, sort of consumer images. So yeah, I just wanted to note that down.
Yeah, but in that sense, I think that popular culture also relates to what you were talking about. So that sense of religion, its belief, that is also very much part of popular culture. And I find it interesting to sort of see how it can branch out into what you were talking about, for instance. So, I mean, it is a topic for debate. What would you think about it? Would you categorize it in popular culture?
I don't know. Yeah, well, somehow, yes, but not...
The image of the...
Yeah, it's a very pop culture, but it's not... It's a really religious image, like the fig or other images and other references in Mira Schendel's work, like the I Ching and like direct references to God. I think it relates more to like this widespread spiritual character of Brazilian society.
Okay.
Perhaps, but I wouldn't know how to place it in relation to like
popular
pop.
culture.
Or
I think Tanya wanted to join in the conversation.
Well, I was just going to say that I think pop is something that there's always been elements of ambiguity about what we mean about pop, and particularly in Britain, we've always addressed ambiguities between what is British pop and what is American pop, and what is also continental pop or nouveau realism. And then to look at pop in relation to Brazil, you have to bring in other terms, not just as in France with nouveau realism, but also new figuration. And new figuration then brings in a sense of, what are the boundaries of pop? What are the motivations behind the formation of images? And I think pop as a category is unstable because of it within Latin America. Because within Latin America in particular, I think pop encompasses also anti-pop and its adoption and undermining for the precisely the opposites of what US-based pop is about. So I think it's kind of very interesting to think about these questions and in relation to Schendel. She's outside of this discussion about pop, but I think it's very interesting, Sophia's paper about to emphasize her awareness of her context and her connections to her context, because I think she was a very aware but deeply sort of detached and aware also of her positionality, to use an awful word, in relation to groups of artists investigating these ideas as well. So I think it was very helpful to kind of look at some of those subtleties in relation to Schendel's production.
We'll move on quickly, and I think this might be the last, as we want to have enough time to eat.
Okay, I just want to take up the question that Isabel posed to the panel that wasn't answered, and I just want to kind of come up with a thought from the political philosopher Boaventura de Sousa Santos, who's Portuguese but is important in Latin America. And the work that's going on with Brazilians in, say, art institutions here, he seems to be very important, but a thread that he takes up seems to be important. And what he does is with researchers in Porto Alegre and different parts of the world, in what he calls the Global South, maps what he calls the abyssal line between what he calls the Global North and the Global South. And it's a metaphor. For the Global North is what is saturated and finished, and the Global South is what is yet to come. That's how he sees it. But it really is taking up the question of colonialism and the impact of colonialism on the Global South, and the kind of loss of knowledges and the loss of being. This is how he puts it, in a kind of epistemicide. And the effect of that, he kind of argues that, along with the huge research project that he's involved with in Latin America, is that new forms of knowledge have to be, there's another way of producing knowledge. And the universals, because you talked a lot about her interest in moving from the singular to the universal, Mira Schendel. And he says, you know, the universals, if they're part of the Global North, then they're like the Oedipus complex, they have to be completely got rid of. You know, they're extremely oppressive. So if they are other universals, they have to be rethought what a universal might be in relation to a completely, what he says, a non-abyssal way of thinking and producing knowledge that reactivates lost being and knowledge. And I just wonder if you've got any thoughts, because he emphasizes in his research, which is a huge research project, he's working with people in the Global South, in Africa and Latin America, the ancestors, the part that the ancestor plays, and how trance and questions of the so-called spiritual actually is a technology for allowing the ancestor to play a part which has always been part of, it seems, culture, but this is not possible to translate in terms of the Global North. Mm-hmm. So this is, do you get the gist of what I'm trying to say? I just wondered whether that might be why this trance and the spiritual is having a resurgence, because it's part, it seems, of a bigger project of trying to unwork the epistemicides and the abyssal forms of knowledge, and to try and release being that has been lost.
I think, you know, I'm not quite familiar with these discussions, but I think it's something that certainly artists and thinkers from Brazil are also aware, because there has been there is a kind of reevaluation of like native cultures, and it's people like Eduardo Viveiros de Castro, who's someone who studies indigenous cultures and you know, has a whole theory about it. It's someone who's been very prominent in the past few years, and so I think definitely this is something that is informing also these practices in some ways, but that would take like another. You know, vast research to get to the point.
So generally, the way he puts it is that it's a deterritorializing project, which has to guard against a form of Orientalism, because it has to open its processes to the outside of what, as you were saying yesterday, you know, you have to break open the conventions and the canon to something outside without that becoming a form of Orientalism.
Yeah, but that's very interesting.
I think this is a good point to break for lunch. And as far as I remember, we're back here at 2 o'clock, no? Yes.
Yes, can I... Is this working? Can I just say, when people return, if you could sit towards the front of the room, because the presentation after lunch will involve some drawing on a white screen, so you'll be able to see it much better the further forward you sit. So please remember to do that.